Red 2 standing by, all 4 lit and in the green. Welcome back to Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. For today's challenges, one of our racers is short on years and one of them is short on brains. We are looking at Wan Sandage, a Devlikk whose lifespan is only about 9 to 10 years, and Ark Bumpy Roose, a Nuknog who is not very intelligent. They have fairly good stats along the way. How well will those help them out? Now, I do have one little thing to point out before we get into the hot laps and the examination of our races. When I'm doing those hot laps, yes, I am actually using full capacity for everything except the brakes, because I couldn't quite get enough money to get all the brakes after buying the parts, selling them, and so on. That was a little bit of a problem, but we are working at mostly full capacity, so those times are connected to that, and any problems with the times is entirely due to the fact that the driver, i.e. me, is a complete pillock. Now let's move on to our first demonstration for the day. Ark Roose, known as Bumpy for his very physical racing style, was a Nuknog from the humid and impoverished world of Sump. The Nuknogs, known for not being very bright but still capable of delicate and complex tasks, wound up selling their world to mining corporations in exchange for food, work and accommodation. They wound up being used as slaves and thoroughly exploited, their world's ecosystem contaminated to devastating extent. Of course, they didn't actually realise they were being exploited, despite the many deaths in mining accidents, until some Jedi arrived and made it very clear to them. And now you know why Bumpy has an utterly stereotypical simpleton voice in the game. He really isn't that bright. The government of Sump let him race off-world in a hope that he might somehow improve their image. To be fair to Bumpy, he actually did pretty well with his straightforward and unsubtle methods, and proved a popular racer on Aqualaris, getting a track named after him. He also proved prominent on Tatooine, encountering Anakin Skywalker during a race. Though Bumpy ultimately won, the fact he was nearly beaten by the human child made him something of a laughingstock. Not that he isn't in this game, he's a bit of a joke character and kept clipping through the railings on Abyss when I tried to use him. You can see that in the second long episode I put up a little while back. Lamenting the perceived humiliation Anakin had inflicted on him, Bumpy was hired by Diva Funkita, a Thelan aide to Gardula the Hutt. Funkita was working under orders to eliminate Skywalker while Gardula sorted her bets out with Jabba. Bumpy eagerly accepted the offer and proceeded to accidentally drink cleaning fluid in celebration. I would be willing to bet Mos Espa to a Truget that Funkita might have been regretting her choice there. There was, admittedly, a slight problem when it actually came to sabotaging Anakin's pod racer. Our genius did not actually know what it looked like. He chanced across Sebulba, who was in the middle of sabotaging Mars Quo's pod racer, and quite wisely chose to ask the Dug what it looked like. Sebulba dismissively responded that it probably looked like a piece of junk, and Bumpy soon found a pod he had never seen before and believed was in a state of disrepair. He proceeded to sabotage it, and it was this act that would cause all sorts of trouble for Ben Quaderneros. Bumpy would make it to the third and final lap of the race, where he was taken out of commission by Sebulba's bodyguard Dud Bolt. The crash also happened to take Bolt down with Roose, and both wound up recovering in the Mos Espa Medical Center. Not much is known of Bumpy's career after this. As an interesting note, in the movie Bumpy stands at 1.63 meters tall, but he's considerably shorter in the game. Ark Roose's pod racer has a somewhat squat and bulky design, its unusual engines being built around a central cylinder. These Volkov-Strude Plug 8G 927 cluster array engines actually have 16 engines across the two clusters, so the pod racer can perform particularly well in terms of speed. The central cylinder offered strong cooling methods, but the pod also has shocking handling. The cockpit measures 1.83 metres long and the engines are 4.5 metres long, making it one of the smaller craft. Its maximum speed was listed at 775 kilometers an hour. Even though the movie states it has a fairly good top speed, as we can see, Bumpy jets out with some pretty good acceleration. He's got fairly decent cooling and good air brakes. Top speed, traction and turning can be a bit of an issue.
Change your mind.
So we will wind up with somewhat average traction despite a good start. It's pretty much middle of the road. On the other hand, he will actually handle pretty well in spite of what I've just said. Acceleration, he starts out well but does not get a significant boost to his acceleration. Nonetheless, it's already pretty good. As for his top speed, he will pretty much hit it with a block 5, but it's not going to be fantastic. It's roundabout average for the game, I'd say. Braking turns out pretty good, actually hits peak, which is very nice. And the cooling, despite what the description says, will not be supremely outstanding, but it will still do the job well enough. And his repair will actually go up fairly well comparatively speaking, but it's still not going to be anything to write home about. That's probably because Bumpy has a very chaotic style and doesn't really care about repairing things too much. Alright, it is time to take a look at the laps. And even though Ark Bumpy Roose is all bumps and no brains, he has actually done particularly well for himself. With that great acceleration off the line, some excellent times have been posted. Those short squat engines seem to function particularly well, because if we look at the Lapboard, we have a rather spectacular time of 2 minutes 0.292 seconds. An incredible time, very close to cracking a pretty impressive mark and the fastest one we've had so far. Quite a surprise, in fact. We'll have to see how Wan Sandage goes, but at the moment, Bumpy actually has something to be really proud of. Good on him. A Devlikk from Order Radama, Wan Sandage was regarded as something of a playboy and had a great many female fans among his species. Though his sense of direction was immaculate on Order Radama, something shared by all Devlikks and reflected in the construction of their cities, this sense failed him whenever he was away from the planet. So if you like, think of him as an alien version of James May. Due to the short lifespan of the Devlikk species, Sandage wanted to secure his name in the record books with one epic feat, and he believed the best way to do that was to defeat Sebulba in a race. He was more than willing to cheat in order to do so and hired the services of Oldar Bedo prior to the Bunta Classic. Bedo demanded a lot of money up front, knowing how dangerous the job was and how cunning Sebulba could be. Sandage would pay 200,000 Whoopie, as well as the upfront half of Bedo's usual 100,000 Trugud fee. Unfortunately, Oldar Bedo could not complete the hit on Sebulba, though he did finish in third place, while Wan Sandage went off course in the third lap and crashed into a sandcrawler. He considered it a major blow to his pride that Bedo surpassed him in skill, but the Glimford hitman insisted he would finish the job, and sought to complete his duty once more during the Winter Harvest Classic. The hit once again failed, although this time Sandage managed to finish the race and actually did quite well for himself. Little more is known about Sandage's pod racing career. Devlikk biology caught up with him and he died in 29 BBY. The species' lifespan was only around about 9 to 10 years. His son Wan Sandage Jr. would take up his father's career in pod racing, using his rebuilt pod racer. Perhaps because of this, he was often mistaken for his father. Sandage Jr. was an aggressive racer, his reckless tactics earning the crowd's favour at Soulist's Serra's Serrano track. He did prove fairly capable in the lower echelons of the new pod racing circuits, holding a knockout record at Ryloth's Brightlands, but did not hold any records on higher tracks. And that's pretty much all we know for the Sandage family. Wan Sandage's pod racer has a few little customization touches, such as the sail-like fin over the cockpit. It's naturally streamlined with the scoop-like fairings on the engines, improving airflow, and the fins on the cockpit add to the aerodynamics. The racer boasts excellent traction and braking systems, with its two Elsinore Cordova Turbo Dyne 99U engines offering a top speed of 785 km an hour. The cockpit measures in at 2.06 metres long, and the engines are 5.03 metres long, again making it one of the smaller pod racers. As we can see, Sandage's pod racer has phenomenal traction. Very good air brakes as well. Top speed is not great, cooling and repair aren't great, but it does have reasonable turning and acceleration for the base parts. So, let's see what else Wan Sandage can be packing. Our daring Devlikk will easily hit top traction. An R300 will give him excellent traction, and he'll improve his turning quite well, as we can see through the different parts. He will handle very smoothly. There will not be much of a jump in acceleration, but he'll get off the mark pretty well. When it comes to upgrading his top speed, on the other hand, he's round about middle of the road. He'll hit that top speed with the Block 6. On the other hand, his braking is so good, he will actually hit top with a Tri-Jet. Cooling will not be fantastic. It'll jump up fairly well compared to where it starts, but it's still not going to be great. He will actually get some fairly decent repair, as we can see, improving a bit more than his cooling. Well, when we take a look at the Lapboard, it seems like Wan Sandage really made the most of his short time. He's been putting in some pretty consistent times against that very strong acceleration that gets him off to a really good start, and his times are clustered in around the group of, well, there's only really about a second or so between all of them, which suggests he's a pretty consistent racer when you get right down to it. But in the end, we do have a pretty impressive fastest time for Wan Sandage, and it is 2 minutes 0. Going for the Top Gear style pause here. 0.567 seconds just off the pace set by Bumpy Roose, but nonetheless a very impressive time to skirt with that 2 minute mark. You know, it's going to be something special to actually break that one. We've had some pretty good times, but we'll see what happens in the next episodes. We have 15 more races to go, so we should have some amazing results coming up. We've already had some pretty good ones and some surprising ones. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Until next time, this is Red 2 returning to base. May the Force be with you.